It's called a Decca Harmony. Right, well, after a lot of faffing about, I've got this powered off the bench supply. I did change the belt, and as you can see, the belt that we took off is a bit bent. The problem is that the wow and flutter when you play back is absolutely dreadful. Now the question then is it the motor or is it something on the bearing of this flywheel here? Well, we have good and bad news here. The good news is that I think I've identified the problem. The bad news is that I don't see an easy solution. So let's show you where we are at the moment with that new belt on. And we've seen this before. It's around the right frequency, but it's wobbling about. So what I've worked out is that this belt that I've put on is a little bit thinner than the one that I took off. And it's not by very much. And as a result, it's wobbling about inside that groove in the pulley. Whether it's this one or the bottom one, I don't know. But it is moving about, and that's what's causing the wow and flutter. Now, if I take this belt off, here's another belt which is a bit more robust, I think. There's also a bit different section. Is a round section. And that isn't moving about because that's filling the gap, really, with the pulley. It's very difficult to get this thing to stand up. But there we go. Now I'm going to play this again and see what we get. And I think you can see that the frequency is a lot more stable now and it's not wobbling about. There is some, obviously. We wouldn't expect no wow and flutter. We'll expect some. But you can see it's quite stable compared to what it was before. So problem solved then, isn't it? Well, no, it's not, because you have to look a little bit closer at the frequency here. And as you can see, that's now 3.4 kilohertz. So it's 13% fast compared to what it was before. And that's because this bigger belt has changed the gearing between the motor pulley and the flywheel pulley. Well, that's no good, is it? Radio 3's Katie Durham sounds like an overstimulated talkie toy. Actually, to be fair, she does sound a bit like that at the right speed.
And now, we welcome Wyn Evans back to the stage for a piece made famous by one of the
Oh, we're not allowed to mention him anymore. He won't be invited to any more Radio 3 barbecues. So here are the three belts that we just used. That's the original one with the kink in it, which is why it doesn't work. This is a replacement one I initially used. And you can see, I think, from looking at it, it does look a little bit thinner. I'm not sure how much that shows up here. And this is the round section one that I just used that was making it run fast. Now, it's quite difficult to measure the thickness of a rubber belt, of course, because it compresses. But I'm going to do my best on this. So here's the original belt, and trying not to compress it, I'm getting 1.12 millimeters there. This is the replacement one. And again, I'm pushing it just to the point where I feel it beginning to compress. And you can see with this one, it's perhaps I'll get that in a better place. That's nearer 1 millimeter. So 0.12 millimeters. You wouldn't have thought that was very much, would you? Let's have a look at this one here. The bigger one that made it run fast. And you can see that's nearer sort of 1.6 millimeters. These little 0.1 and 0.6 millimeter differences, I mean, this one's quite a big one, obviously, make a lot of difference, either to the speed at which the thing runs. I mean, this one being much fatter belt makes it run a lot quicker because it's sitting higher on the pulleys and increasing the effective diameter of the driving pulley more than it does the driven pulley, which is why the gearing is higher, which is why it runs faster. This one, however, is too thin and wobbles about inside it. This one is a Goldilocks belt, except that Goldilocks has gone out of shape. That's a shame, isn't it? So now what I've got to do is try and look through my collection of belts and see if I can find one with a thickness of around 1.12 millimeters. I'll spare you the many hours it will take to do that, and maybe at the end I'll find one, and if I don't, I might have to order one. So I'll get back to you. Right, well, I didn't have any belts that were the right thickness in my collection. Pretty much all the ones I've got are 1mm jobs, or I've got some 1.2mm ones that I found, but they're so tiny they're not usable on this. So I ended up having to go and order a belt, which was the one classified as Belt 111 from the wonderful people at CPC Farnell. Looking at the measurements, it seemed okay. It was 75mm diameter, 1.2mm thickness. You have to be a bit careful when buying belts, really, because sometimes they give you the diameter of the belt, and other times they give you what they call the folded length, which is if you take the belt and pull it flat and fold it, what that length will be. Now, you can obviously calculate one from the other. The folded length is pi times the diameter divided by 2, but you've just got to make sure you're looking at the right figure when you're ordering them, otherwise you're going to end up with the belts the wrong size. This one is a little slacker than I'd like it. I'd like it a bit tighter than that, but it does seem to work okay, and it has improved things quite a bit. Another question might have been, why could we not just slow down the motor? Well, the answer is you can't, really. This is a motor that's designed to run off the 6-volt supply at a particular speed for this gearing, and you can reduce the speed by putting series resistance in, but then you reduce the torque so much that it can't do fast forward and rewind. So the only answer really is to get a belt which is the right size. Anyway, having done that, let's see what it's done to the performance. And I think you can see it's quite a lot more stable now than it was. I mean, it's obviously, as I said before, not perfect. It's an old cassette recorder. We're not expecting absolute top quality hi-fi, but you can see now that we're not getting the backward and forward movement of the frequency that we can see as much, although there is obviously going to be some there. And you can see the speed's coming out a little bit fast, but not as stupidly fast as it was before, so you don't really notice that. I mean, I can still hear some wobble in the sound there. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's listenable, and you're not going to get any better than that with a set this age, to be fair. So I think the mechanical side of this is sorted now as far as we can. I'd like to just then go through a few other things that I've done on the thing before I put it back together. By the way, I'm temporarily powering it from one of these things at the moment with 4 AA's in it, and just hacked a one of these connectors onto the end of it. I'll put it back to the normal battery box when it's all back together. The speaker terminals, you remember one of them broke in half, and I said I hope I don't handle the other one too roughly, otherwise that might break in half as well, and of course I did, and it did. So I've actually revised the way I've done that. I put better bits of wire on here, and also put some insulated spade connectors on there, which will give us a bit more of a secure connection and make it easier to move around without breaking things. Now, as I think I said before, the wiring of this thing's a bit of a nightmare in terms of how much freedom of movement you've got between the bits of it. And every time you try to move something, especially around this little multi-way switch here, bits of wiring start coming off. And given that I have no circuit diagram or anything for this, I have to be very careful as soon as I see something come off to stick it back on where it appears to have come off from. Of course, this is the sort of English up with which people will not put, I know that. So I replaced a number of the bits of not very flexible coax with some more flexible coax, which gives me a bit more degrees of freedom here. But I had a lot of trouble with things which have fallen off in actually rewiring this switch here, which has a weird arrangement where it switches the power on and off to the radio. So obviously when you got it in radio mode, you want the radio powered up even when the deck is running, because you might want to record from the deck. But if you're in tape mode where you're playing from the deck, the radio is turned off, so the power for the radio is switched through this. It's a very fiddly arrangement. It took me a while to trace out all the wires and get it into the right state again. So yeah, a lot of rewiring has been done around the place. The other thing I've done is the mains connector. If you remember, we had some prehistoric mains connector you couldn't get bits for anymore, and I've replaced that with a more standard figure of 8, so we can use a normal figure of 8 cable, which you can get anywhere now. So I'm just hoping that having added more wire in order to make things maintainable, that I can push it all back into a reasonable arrangement when we put it back in the case. Speaking of the case, if you recall the cassette door, the wood grain effect had started to rub off it, so I've just given up on that idea, and basically what I've done is just painted the cassette cover black, which doesn't match the rest of it, but it looks okay. It looks as if it could have been intentional, and it doesn't have that horrible faded look of all this stuff coming off. The cassette door had actually broken, and if you look inside the unit, there's these two little things that hold it in, and there's a couple of pins coming out of the cassette door, and one of those have broken off, so I've glued it back on. Also, I've renewed these little foam pads here, which had, I don't think you can quite see those, but the foam pads had perished, so I've put some new ones in there and put the spring back that I found inside. So in this state, if you let go of it, it flips out, but it doesn't make a noise because it hits against the cushion pads. The spring pushes it back, and it will be locked in by the cassette mechanism. Once the cassette mechanism's back in, you press that, it will lock into the cassette mechanism until you press the eject button. So that's okay, that's sorted. I've removed as far as I can those horrible BBC stickers from the tuning scale, so this is all cleaned up. So the next thing really should be putting it all back together, but I think it's probably worth confirming that it does actually work. So if I plug it back into the battery, I put it in radio mode.
And don't forget the classic picture of 7 of them lined
absolutely.
up.
That film poster is one of the most iconic film posters.
Was it 7 of them in the
all
picture?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
What is it? What is...
So the radio's working fine as it was before. There's an interesting effect. I'm just going to take the tape out for a moment. So that was a pre-recorded tape. Make sure I don't accidentally record over the test tape. The things you've got to be careful of working with this is there's a switch, there's a multi-way switch on the back of here. I'm not going to turn it over at the moment. You can see all the solder points for it. And when you put it into record, this gets pushed down and enables all the recording stuff. So even though your cassette may have, like this test tape has had the thing knocked out of it here, so you can't record on it, that's quite easily defeatable in this situation, because if you put it in and you move that switch manually into the record position, it will still record over it. What I'm going to do is, it's in radio mode, so let's just turn the radio up a little bit.
Goldfinger, Carrie Cleo. Didn't that have Amanda Barry starring as Cleo? And A Fistful of Dollars was one of the big releases
Clint
of the year.
Eastwood, loved that.
If you want to do an impression, feel free.
No,
All right.
wouldn't dream of it.
In which case...
That punk just...
So I'm going to put this into record mode by effectively what would happen if I press the record
Release
button.
Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. in 64.
That's Simone and Garfunkel.
Hippie, hippie,
And now the volume control.
Single of theirs, Swinging Blue Jeans.
Oh dear. Once you've done that, the volume control is disabled and the level is fixed. So it hasn't got any automatic level control. It's just got a fixed level that it uses once you switch it to record mode. And that's obviously when you've got the radio on. If I have it in record mode, which I have at the moment, I'm just going to put this back. So if I have it in record mode, but I've turned it off of radio mode, which is where we are now, you have to start the transport for this to work, I think. But you can hear if I put my finger on the microphone connector, I now get some noise, so it would be recording that. In fact, I have the microphone, so this is where I've got to be careful, because we're going to get some hideous feedback in a moment when I try this. Right, here we go. So I'm going to plug this in. And I don't know if you noticed that, but I plugged it in, the motor stops. So now I've got control. If I use the on and off switch on the microphone, it turns the motor on and off, so it would turn the transport on and off. If I put the speaker back on, this is... Oh, we can hear a bit of feedback there, but you can hear me having a bit of amplification of my voice there. And, oh dear, that's terrible. So I'm going to start talking into this and recording something and see if it actually ends up being recorded on the tape. So I'm going to start talking into this and recording something and see if it actually ends up being recorded on the tape. And indeed it did, so that bit's working as well. I suppose I should just demonstrate recording off the radio, even though it's quite annoying because I can't turn the volume down, but we can probably use the monitor switch on that as well. So let me unplug the mic, wind it back again, put it into record and radio.
With BBC Sounds, you can take BBC Radio with you wherever you go. Join the mid-morning conversation over a coffee. If you're heading out, bring us along. Don't miss a thing, even if you're on the school run. And stick with us as you're winding down in the evening. Your favourite stations and shows at the touch of a button. Listen live, whatever you're up to, on BBC Sounds.
Chris Mann.
BBC Radio Cambridgeshire.
With the music and memories of 1964 and the...
If you're heading out, bring us along. Don't miss a thing, even if you're on the school run. And stick with us as you're winding down in the evening. Your favourite stations and shows at the touch of a button. Listen live, whatever you're up to, on BBC Sounds.
Chris Mann.
BBC Radio Cambridgeshire.
With the music and memories of 1964, and there's a movie that came out that year, a rock and roll musical, which is just worth watching. It's wonderfully kitschy. It is starring Elvis Presley.
So yeah, I think I'm okay with that now. I think it's time to put it back together, and that's going to be a bit of a mammoth task, I think. So I'll see you on the other side of that. Well, as I expected, putting it back together has turned out to be a real challenge. All the rewiring I've done, well, it's not useless. I've done it based on how I would lay it out to work on it and get the faults fixed. But when you try and put it back in, everything's in the wrong place. So I've had to reroute a few of the wires, shorten them, lengthen them or whatever to get it so that it goes in. And then, having put the radio bit back, forgot some padding bits of the speakers, so that would probably been a bit vibraty if I'd left it like that. The good thing is I'm now getting quite an expert at getting this thing apart and back together again in a much shorter time than originally. The only problem is I'm having to do it quite a lot. The thing that is giving me a lot of grief actually is this cassette door. Now, as I said, the little pin broke off on this side, and I tried various things like super gluing it back on. That worked for a while, but not for very long. I mean, does super glue actually ever stick anything other than your fingers? I've never been very happy with the results of it. Admittedly, this is a very stressful point because that spring exerts a lot of pressure on that corner there. So it's going to be very difficult to get it right. What I've done in the end, I've found that a 6BA screw is about the right size. It might need a little bit of covering. And I've put some plastic filler around it, and that seems to have made it a bit more solid. So I'm hoping that this time it doesn't break again and I don't have to take it out again. So this is the third or fourth go at putting it back together. So we'll see if that works this time. Well, I've done quite a lot of work on this set, really. I've rewired and rerouted quite a lot of the connections internally and tied them up a bit. What they've done is they've used a lot of really thin wire in this. And apart from the fact they made everything really tight, so there's no slack in any of the wires when you take it out, the wires are so thin that you move anything about and bits fall off, like on this volume pot here. That's come off a couple of times and fooled me into believing I'd completely broken it because there was no sound. And then this little thing in the corner jumps off and you don't notice it. So I put in thicker wire for a lot of this stuff because that reduces the possibility of that happening. And as I said, I've had to pull it apart and put it back together a few times because getting the wires routed so that they don't cross over one another and get tangled up, and secondly don't get caught up in the drive belt and the cassette mechanism here, is a bit of a tricky piece of work. But I think I've got that sorted out. Generally speaking, I don't think the construction of this, in terms of the units themselves, are that bad. Sankyo is a reasonable transport provider, not one of the cheapest ones. The radio, as we'll hear in a few minutes, is pretty good. And you can see I've taken a bit of care with the earthing here of the FM aerial and connected this braid around all these cans here, so, and also put a bit of wax on here to stop the coils moving about, and all of that does contribute to, I think, quite a good FM sound, although sensitivity is a bit variable over the band. It's not particularly as sensitive at the low frequency end where the BBC national stations are. It is at the high frequency end, I think. Although it's in a way hard to tell because there are stronger stations like Heart and Hits Radio, the former local radio stations in Cambridge, are at the top of the band, but also Classic FM sounds okay, and that's one of the ones that is weaker in this area and harder to pick up. Also, there was a bit of noise I found from the motor when you had the radio on. It wasn't a very loud program. You could hear a bit of electrical noise from the motor, so I added this capacitor here to try and knock that back a bit, which it has done. In terms of the motor, I still think that belt is a little too slack, and I'm going to see if I can find a tighter one for it. Maybe one that's 70mm instead of 74. I think the thing with these belts is that if you get a tape deck, or particularly Walkman, you can usually go on eBay and put the model number of the Walkman in, and it'll give you the right belt for it. But this thing, you can't find any information about it online, so it really is just measuring and a little bit of guesswork. Overall, though, after a lot of false starts, I would say it's now done.
Xander will be here in about 20 minutes' time, kicking off with the Big Country and the Anvil Chorus this morning. He's not messing about. Before that, though, should we have some Binge?
The splendidly named Ronald Binge, little known nowadays, was a giant of the school of British light orchestral music, and that tune, Elizabethan Serenade, wasn't originally called that, and it was written before the accession of Queen Elizabeth II. But after she became Queen, it was renamed in her honour. He was also famous for writing the music before the shipping forecast on Radio 4, Sailing By, and another wonderful tune, Cornet Carillon, which was used famously for an advert for Webster's Pennine Bitter, drives out the northern thirst. That was the strapline. And the advert, I think, involved the great Yorkshire and England fast bowler Freddie Truman. But I could be wrong about that. I can't find any video of the old advert online, but you can hear the tune, certainly. I should have lacquered this, really, shouldn't I? Or at least painted it perhaps later on in the process, because it's now beginning to chip away the paint, because I've had to take it apart and put it on the bench so many times. It looks worse on the camera than it does in real life, or I probably will apply another coat. Overall, what is there to say about this? Well, I think I saw implied when we were looking inside it. It's a thing where the whole is less than the sum of the parts. They've got a decent radio and a decent tape transport, but packaging it, they haven't really done a very good job, I don't think. There's a few things missing. I mean, I don't like the lack of automatic level control, and the fact that when you put it into record, you've got fixed volume, and you have to listen to it at that volume if you want to listen to it at all, or you have to listen to it on silent by turning the speaker off. I'm not keen on the fact that there's no latching, fast forward and rewind, although that really is a function of the tape transport, so can't blame that one on Decca. Internally, as we saw, the wiring's very fragile, and it's interesting, this is made in Japan, as you can just about see here, and you don't really expect low quality from Japanese stuff in the 1970s, but I do get the feeling that Decca, as the British customer of whoever manufactured it, said, you know, can you save a bit on costs and use a bit of thinner wire? Because this will save us 3 and 8pence, which could go towards some softer paper and nicer soap for the executive toilet. But I think you can hear that the sound is pretty good. The fixed recording level does mess up the recording of the radio a little bit, because if you're on a strong station, it's too high and it gets distorted. I've noticed that if you record Radio Cambridgeshire, which is about the strongest station around here, or the new Sound of Hits radio for Cambridge, both of them, you get a lot of distortion on the tape, whereas if you record Radio 2, it's not bad, except you get some noise from the motor then, because it's a bit lower overall sound level. But overall, I think the sound is quite good. And I do actually quite like the styling of it. I think it's a nice looking set. This has taken me a long time to do, and, you know, people go on about sunk cost fallacy. People say certain things are fallacies, you know, like the slice of the pie fallacy, that you can grow the pie or whatever. And sometimes there just isn't enough pie to go round, you know. And sometimes it is worth sinking a lot of cost into something like this, because there is some reward from it. This was really just ready to go in the bin when I got it. And although it was quite laborious trying to fix it, none of the fixes were complicated. We didn't have to do any difficult fault finding, really. We just had to get the right components and put some decent wiring in. And a proper mains socket. As you can see, it's now running off the mains without using a highly dangerous inlet connector. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. I'll see you on the next one.